Welcome back to the Sunday Long Read podcast. My name's Amanda Ulrich. I'm a journalist and college lecturer based in California, and this week we're diving into a new episode of our Behind the Story series. Today's story comes from Caity Weaver, a staff writer for the New York Times Magazine, who wrote about one very unique annual celebration in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and how this celebration could very well be the key to the city's happiness. Hi, thanks so much for joining the Sunday Long Read podcast again. We appreciate you coming back.
Thank you for having me. When was the last time I was on it? I remember doing it, but I actually have no idea what date it was.
I think it was 2019 when I was looking back in the archives.
Okay.
That is the date I was seeing. But so it's,
Okay.
been half a decade now.
Oh my God, Jesus.
Time is just flying. But first off, I just want to say that I love this story. And it really, really makes me want to go to Santa Fe. I feel like I need to see this tradition happen in real time.
Thank you. I'm so glad you enjoyed it. And I'm very happy to hear that it makes you want to come to Santa Fe. Have you ever been before?
I have not. So have you heard from the tourism board or city officials that they've gotten feedback after this story? That's what I was thinking after reading this, that this has to be kind of a unintentional boost to them.
I think I maybe got an email from someone, but I don't remember the exact department, and not even necessarily saying that they had gotten a boost, but just like acknowledging that the story had happened, and I think that they liked it. But I really love convincing people to come to Santa Fe for a trip. I think it is one of, it's funny because I think a lot of Americans know the name Santa Fe. Most people have not actually been to Santa Fe. And I think it's in an odd way, an underrated city, even though it's one that people know by name, because once you actually go and walk around and eat the food and see it, it's, I put it on a level with like New Orleans in terms of cities that are really not like anywhere else in the US, but are super fun to explore. So I'm glad that it's maybe making you think that you might want to come through. You should.
It absolutely is. So for people who have not been there before, have never heard of Zozobra, which is the subject of your story, how would you describe it to those who know nothing about it?
Okay, so Zozobra is a huge puppet that the people of Santa Fe set on fire every year. In 2024, it was their 100th year doing this. And this puppet is like bigger basically than any building downtown. It's really huge. And they set it absolutely fully on fire. And the idea is that you're kind of burning up your gloom and your anxiety when you do that. There's a whole very complex mythology around the puppet, which is a modern invention. It doesn't, it's not like an ancient creature of Santa Fe. It was invented in the 1920s by an artist from Philadelphia. And it just turns into this crazy spectacle that, a lot of people, everyone in town knows what it is. Not everyone comes to it, but a lot of people do come to it or have in the past. Maybe they grew up coming to it. Maybe they found it a little later. But one of the things that I really enjoy about it is that if you don't live in Santa Fe and haven't happened to be here on the night when Zozobra is burned, there's a really good chance that you have no idea what it is, even though the kind of iconography of Zozobra is very much incorporated into the town. Like one of my favorite things is that there's a sort of Zozobra design on one of our fire trucks.
I saw that.
and so if you had never been here on the right, evening in summer, you would just have no idea what this strange kind of demonic creature is on the side of the fire truck. It's not explained. So you either know it or you don't. And I love that on the one hand, it feels kind of so big in town, but it's actually very small and most people have no idea what it is.
I mean, that was kind of your experience, right? I think you said in this story that you had never heard of this whole thing until you saw Zozobra set on fire.
Exactly.
In front of you.
Yes, my husband and I just happened to be in Santa Fe one year on the right night when they were burning it. And Santa Fe is a pretty early town. People get up early, and also the restaurants close fairly early. So often at night, there's not a ton to do. But we could tell that something big was going on in town. So we just kind of, followed the crowd and ended up in this field seeing an enormous puppet set on fire. And it was fantastic.
Well, that's the thing. I think it's such a unique idea for a tradition that when I was reading this story, I was hooked by that concept that I can imagine if you're seeing this happen for the first time. It's something that you really are not going to see anywhere else.
Mm-hmm. And that's actually one of the reasons why I even pitched this story to the Times Magazine was I just knew that the photos would be really cool and that we could maybe get some cool video from it. And so the photographer that the Times sent out did an amazing, amazing job. I feel like a lot of the compliments, probably most of the compliments I'm getting on the story are actually for the photos and the videos that I did not take. But it was my idea to have someone take them. So maybe I get a smidge of credit. But yeah, this is one that it was such a pleasure to like scroll through and then to see it in print. He just did a really, really amazing job.
I do feel like that's always how it goes, is that the photos and the videos are the elements that draw people in first. Yeah. And oftentimes on a story, that's what people may comment on first. But then I would say the videos and the photos for this did draw me in first. But then you pay for the story.
It's also, it's kind of hard to describe. So if we didn't have the photos and the videos, I think the story, I mean, if you just really kind of can't even conceive of it unless you see it. So I did my best, but definitely the photos and the videos were a big help. And I do have that experience, especially with things like celebrity profiles. Really, I would say most of the time, the only thing that the profile subject cares about is like the photos, or that's what their rep cares about, And so then it's kind of like the text is sort of like a border that goes around the photos. So I'm used to sort of the photos being what really catches the eye, but this was fun because it was me saying, I know that these will be good photos, and kind of starting from that point.
The other details in this that I love, of course, people write their life problems, their grievances on pieces of paper, and then they burn. But then you were talking about the other things that people have burned, the medical bills, the wedding dresses. Was there one particular crazy item that stood out to you that has been burned in the past?
Well, so when you come to it, you and the crowd are not, you are just seeing the puppet. So everything is already inside of it. So you don't really or at least I have never seen someone like shoving something in, but I believe Ray Sandoval, who's the kind of chair of this event, described, let me just double check and make sure that this detail made it in. Yes, he said that someone once burned a pristine guitar, like a perfect guitar, and just no explanation, but like wanted this to go inside and burn. And so they burned it.
Yeah. What was there any special meaning to that guitar? It was just a brand new, beautiful guitar.
He said the man didn't explain.
Right. I could imagine that would be part of this, is that there's like the anonymous element to all of the items and the obviously the grievances about life that are all going inside. Like everything is anonymously burning together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think definitely. And I also love that. I feel like, New Mexico, it's a fairly low population density state. So I think to a certain extent, there are some families who have been here for like thousands of years. But then if you're not one of those families, then I think it's also very easy to kind of stay out of other people's business if you want to. And so all of which is to say, this is the kind of place where you could just say, I want to set this brand new guitar on fire, and people will just let you do that and not ask too many questions. You won't have to fill out a lot of forms to do that.
Right. Yeah, that was the interesting thing about this. You have the part of this story where you're talking about, of course, with anything like this, people are going to have opinions about how it unfolds. And you talk about how some locals have complained about the ticket prices to see Zozobra burn and stuff like that. But in general, it seems like people in Santa Fe rally around this tradition. Is that what you saw, that this is kind of a universally beloved thing?
I think it's certainly very well attended. As I said, not everyone goes to it. And I think a lot of people as with so many things in life, think that it used to be better. The old way they did it was preferable. But definitely it is still a very well-attended event. And I think that just the concept of Zozobra as a very Santa Fe thing is something that the people of Santa Fe seem to really lean into.
And you talk about the history of course, 100 years ago, this starting for the first time, but it does seem like this tradition came out of nowhere, essentially. Is that your feeling about it too?
I wouldn't quite say nowhere because the artist who invented it, of course, was familiar with things being burned in effigy and people being burned in effigy. And there's actually a great oral history that someone did with him, I think in maybe the 1960s, where he mentions a Native American tribe out of Arizona. On Easter, they burn a Judas in effigy. But I don't think that he attributed, the inspiration for Zozobra to just one thing. So as you kind of read different interviews with him, sometimes he'll mention different things. But so I wouldn't say it quite came out of nowhere, but it definitely, it was not clearly inspired by just one single thing.
Right. I think what's so appealing about that is, especially right now, the holiday season, thinking about Christmas, Hanukkah, New Year's, like there are all of these baked in traditions for those holidays. But do you think something like Zozobra is kind of a cool example of traditions are just what we decide they should be, essentially, that you can just start doing this thing that's kind of cool, and then eventually 100 years down the road, that becomes its own tradition?
Yeah, for sure. And I am someone who I really love traditions. I am a big Christmas person. I love decorating. I think it's a fun way to kind of mark the passage of time if you know that you do the same thing at the same time of year every year. And as the Zozobra shows, you can do it for 100 years in a row, even if you just make it up one day. So yeah, I think it's a very good example of, traditions can kind of be whatever you want them to be. And as long as you keep doing it, then it's a tradition.
When you initially told your editors about this story, of course, it has the 100-year kind of news hook, news peg to it. But how did you tell them about this story and what it was initially?
I sent them a pitch that was focused mainly on it. It skewed very heavily toward just describing my experiences at Zozobra, which can be kind of chaotic. I don't even think I put this in a draft, but I do remember that in my pitch, I described how in 2023, when I went, I waited in line for a very long time to get, and they were sold out of almost all the food that I was waiting in line for by the time I got up to like the front of the stall. So I think I ended up getting a hot dog after like 40 minutes in line, maybe. And then I walked just a few feet away to a different stall and ended up getting another hot dog and then a third hot dog for free. They just like had so many extra hot dogs. They're like, do you want two? So that's there's a sort of a charmingly kind of ramshackle, chaotic element to it. That is another thing that I really like about it.
So hot dogs featured prominently in your pitch for the story.
Yes. So hot dogs feature prominently in, I would say, 90% of my pitches, and this was no exception. So yeah, I focused on that. I had originally pitched something slightly different, although I am happy in the end that we did it the way we did. I was thinking that it might be interesting to really follow more closely over the course of a year, this event coming together, since it was going to be so big. And the Zozobra, the folks who put on Zozobra, which it's run now through the local Kiwanis Club, are meeting all year long, every month. I went to a few of those meetings. But so I had pictured something that was kind of much more going to be about the process and the lead up to it. And then ultimately we decided, let's actually just really kind of focus on the day itself and capturing most of the details from that day. And of course I did research and I interviewed people. But I think that ultimately that was a good way to do it because, you want to have as many pictures and videos as possible of just this thing on fire. And that only happens at the very end. So if you're there for the whole process, it's not on fire for most of that process.
And I think it's helpful to drop readers into the story at the very top, you see it burning. So you're dropped into like what this is immediately.
Yeah, versus let me explain to you how this thing that you probably have never encountered is coming together over the course of a year. I could see that you're asking readers to sort of invest a lot of time and attention before you actually get around to the big reveal if you do it that way, versus starting with the reveal and saying, you want to know what this is? I'll tell you right now.
But I would say that the process part did shine through in the story when you're talking to um, those who are putting this on and the process of putting it on and feedback from people who live in Santa Fe. Like I did get a sense of what it's like to put this on. So in the end,
That's nice.
that definitely was part of it, I felt.
Oh, good. I'm glad to hear that. And I will also say, I've done a lot of interviews in my time, and the people who work on Zozobra are so happy to talk about it. It really is good vibes there. They were like, from what I understand, I think the fact checking process was quite easy. We do, I of course try to get all the facts right when I file the draft, and then we have another research editor who goes through and kind of independently verifies things. And that can be you can really get bogged down and having to go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And I think this was, they got back to us quickly. Everything was like boom, 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 done. So yeah, this was a fun one to work on for many reasons, not the least of which was that, it was just easy to talk to people. They were happy to chat about it.
Right. I feel like you never know in terms of a feature like this. Sometimes you think the subject of the feature is going to be happy with the direction you take, and that's not necessarily always the case. So it's just kind of the cherry on top if they, aren't super mad about some specific element in the end.
Yes, definitely. And well, the other nice thing is that, because it has such a history in Santa Fe, they have pretty detailed information about, like how it comes together now, how it's come together in the past. So oftentimes I think when you're interviewing someone and you ask like, what was this? And they have to like, I'll go look it up. A lot of the folks I was talking to just knew the answer right off the top of their head. And then the fact checking process was just kind of them shoring that up with documentation. But yeah, it's something that people are really passionate about, that people really like. And so it was a pleasure to interview them about something that they were happy to be interviewed about.
Right. It's a nice change maybe from other types of stories that we often have to do.
Hello, I'm Albert Samaha. I'm an award-winning journalist at The Washington Post, author most recently of the book Concepcion, and the guest editor of the Sunday Long Reads True Crime Spotlight newsletter. Check out our monthly newsletter, where I'm curating the best true crime stories, from thrilling narratives through little-known underworlds to investigations that expose corporate or police misconduct. You can subscribe at sundaylongread.com/truecrime. That's sundaylongread.com/truecrime. Hope you'll join us. Peace.
I love in your bio for the magazine that you say you write feature stories about contemporary American life and that you spend your time traipsing around, always curious and frequently baffled, which I just felt like was a fun bio. How do you generally decide what stories you're going to work on at any given time?
That's a good question. I really am. First of all, I have a fantastic job. I'm so lucky to have my job, and they really give me a lot of leeway to kind of come to them and say what I'm interested in. And sometimes they make me justify it to them a little bit. Like with Zozobra, I can't just say, I'm going to go do Zozobra. And they say, yes, I have to explain what it is. But if I am curious in something and really interested in it, that is, we've often done kind of 90% of the work at that point of getting the pitch approved. So yeah, I just sort of let my curiosity guide it for the most part. And sometimes, I actually love when my editors come to me with ideas, because I sort of feel like every idea I have, I end up doing. And then it's like, oh my God, well, that was that idea. Now I need a new idea. So it's so nice when someone's like, hey, have you thought about doing this? I love hearing that. But otherwise it's just whatever is kind of lodging itself in my brain and that I start thinking about obsessively. And then eventually when they ask for an idea, I just blurt out, the first thing that's on my mind.
Right. Whether you're on staff or freelancing, just pitching different story ideas just seems like it's always going to be part of the process.
Mm-hmm.
How do you determine how long one of these types of stories might take? And how do you talk to your editors about that potential length of time?
don't even know if we really have conversation. I just kind of always ask, like, when do you need this text by? When is this due? And then I work backwards from there. And, in the beginning when we decided, okay, well, you're not going to spend all year very closely following this. We're going to mainly focus on just kind of the final week. Then I know it's going to take about a week. And this is nice because this is a really discrete event where when it's done, it's done. So it's not like, a profile of someone, which you could just sort of drag out forever. It's like this happens and then it's done. So there's only so long that it can be dragged out. And I will drag it out that long. But, you run out of runway eventually. So yeah, I usually I don't think very kind of detailed sit downs with my editor. And I say, okay, well, I will spend like X weeks working on this. I think we've gotten into a rhythm where, we each know about how long it generally takes me to write. I think I'll put it this way. I haven't gotten any complaints that things are like taking me way too long. So that's all I need until I start getting the complaints that, why haven't you turned anything in for this? Then I'll assume that it's working out okay.
Right. The cool thing too about this is that you didn't publish this story around the time of Zozobra burning, that you published it in November. But to me, reading it, that's why I think this is kind of a cool time to talk about it, because it just is interesting to think about kind of holidays and traditions and how they come about. Was there a reason why you decided to publish it in November rather than around the time it was happening?
Sort of two reasons. Well, one was just that. So that actually was, I said that we don't have very detailed logistical discussions. This was one thing that we discussed. I just said early on, and everyone agreed. Because it only takes a few minutes to actually completely go up in flames. There's no way to publish this, before it's done burning. So it's not ever going to be a timely story. It was always going to have to come out after the event has happened. The local Santa Fe paper, the New Mexican, does an amazing job getting photos and writing the story up and getting them in next day's paper. We were not working on that timeline, luckily. Luckily for me, since I I don't like to have to write really fast. So we knew that, no matter what, it was going to come out after the fact. And then it was kind of, oh, well, should we do it? The pictures, maybe they'd be good for kind of Halloween. And then we're thinking, oh, well, so if we publish it sort of around the election, we're going to, there's going to be so much election news. Maybe people will be interested in seeing one thing that is not explicitly tied to the election. So I think that's what, I can't remember the exact date it ended up running. But it was sort of, I think they just looked at the calendar and tried to figure out when do we have a spot when people might be interested in clicking a story about a giant flaming puppet, and then they slotted it in there.
I like the behind the scenes details of that, because I do feel like that's often how it goes. Do you have an idea of when it might work, and then things like the election come up, and then you just need to go with it when it makes sense?
Mm-hmm. And even, the election at least was previously scheduled, so we all knew when that was going to be. But there, other news can happen, and that's kind of, if you're working for a weekly magazine, you can very often get sort of preempted by breaking news. So a story like this that is going to, no matter when it runs, it's going to be late. I think it kind of gives everyone a little bit of a break, because it's like, okay, well, now we're just going to really wait until we want to run this. We don't have to have it by a certain date. And then if something happens that we can't have it on that date, it's, a big issue. Other writers who are writing more timely things do not have this luxury. So I feel very, very fortunate to have been able to write something that could kind of go whenever we want.
Right. Yeah. In terms of thinking about long form, like this, which is so great, how do you feel about the future of long form in the next few years? Do you feel optimistic about the possibility of more reporters being able to do long form stuff like this? What do you think the appetite is from editors in terms of longer, kind of more narrative approaches to stories?
I don't know. Well, I could speak maybe more to how I view it as a consumer, which is I still really like it. I love reading things that are very long, and I don't even think this was that long. I can't remember how long it was. To me, nothing ever feels long enough.
Right.
To me,
the idea of long form, I think, can really depend on whose opinion it is.
Yes. So I love long form that's like 80,000 words, and make it as long as you possibly can. And I really like reading that stuff. And I know that I am not, I'm not so special that I'm the only person who likes reading long form. So I feel like as long as I have an appetite for it, there are going to be other people out there who do. And so that kind of gives me hope that I know that there are at least some humans out there who still enjoy reading long things, who don't just want to watch like a short video about something. And every once in a while, a short video is maybe fine and what you need. But if I had the choice to watch a little video about Zozobra or to read a few thousand words about it or about anything, I would almost always choose to read a few thousand words.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I feel like because the internet is such a crowded space, there's so much content on everything in the world that it's kind of nice. You feel like it's kind of an experience when you have something like this that's a little bit longer. You have like, it's more of a, it sounds like fiction writing at some points, it's more of a, experience.
And especially if you are lucky enough to have access to the print paper, it just always looks so beautiful. It's really, there's a reason why magazines were so popular for so long. It actually is nice to look at a magazine that has been really thoughtfully designed and planned out. And, and of course it looks good online too. I don't want to knock our web design. I think the story looks beautiful online, but just the physical format of it is so different. The layout of it, it's wider. It's not just scrolling down. So they can do things that you're not encountering online because on, your computer screen or your phone screen does not open up sideways the way that a magazine does. And so I think it's nice to have opportunities to really sit down with something and page through and see how it's laid out. All of that I really enjoy.
Yeah. Do you think the attention spans are different if you're just scrolling through the internet versus you're opening a print magazine or newspaper? You're like actually dedicating time to reading whatever it is.
Yeah, I'm sure. And I read, I certainly mostly read things online. I don't want to imply that I don't. But if I'm reading on my phone, I'm getting text on my phone and then maybe a click away. Versus if I'm looking at a magazine, I can't get text notifications when I'm inside a magazine. So inevitably, there are fewer potential distractions. And I think there is, this whole story is about sort of ritual and tradition. There is something to be said for like the ritual of just sitting down and thinking, okay, I'm now going to sit down with this sort of discrete item and page through it versus the phone that you do everything on all the time.
Right. Or versus I need to get started on whatever this work thing is or respond to this email. And then on the side, you're reading this story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think maybe the difference is that you're not necessarily in the absolute middle of your workday, like all of a sudden flipping open a magazine. You really are kind of setting aside time to do it. And so that makes it a little bit of a treat.
Right. In thinking about 2025, this next year, are there any resolutions or goals that you have in terms of particular stories or writing, reporting, anything that you have thought about for this next year?
I know, like I said, I already have a great job, so I just want to keep getting paid to do my job. If I could do that, then the goal has been accomplished. I think it's always my dream that my editor will come back to me and say, "Oh, Caity, you need to make this much longer." He has never said that. It's always more like, we need to cut this in half. So that would be a nice goal if he would come back and say, "Hey, we decided we want this to be 900 times longer." That would make me very happy and is something I could easily accomplish on any topic.
So the goal is write longer and have your editors be okay with it.
Yeah, which it's a lofty goal. I don't think it's very realistic. I don't see that happening, but if it did, that would be fantastic.
Would you say, I just love the idea of writing a life problem down on a piece of paper and burning it. Do you think that could become a new New Year's Eve tradition instead of writing resolutions, that people would write down problems that they have and then burn it like this?
That's
I just
funny.
think that would be fun.
People love fire. People love setting little pieces of paper on fire. I think it absolutely could be. And if this is something you want to do, find a way to do it safely and do it. Don't burn down your house. But yeah, it's, like we were saying earlier, if you just start doing something, you have created a tradition. You don't have to wait for someone to kind of present it to you. You can just start doing it yourself, and then it's a tradition. But be careful.
Right. You don't want to suggest this advice is going to go out there and then someone is going to start a small fire in their house.
Yeah. Right.
At the end of your story, you write that maybe doing this, burning a slip of paper with your grievances on it, won't like eradicate unhappiness. But I also love the line where you say, simply by pretending with straight faces that such a feat is possible, the people of Santa Fe create a space for enthusiastic, widespread madness. I just love the chaos of madness at the end. Do you think
Yes.
that that's kind of the key of this? That it's like unlocking the mundane, the boredom of our daily lives?
I think so. And I think there's also maybe a little something to be said. It's sort of like, with Santa Claus, how we just sort of all talk about Santa Claus and we know he lives in the North Pole and we know what he does. And it's almost like, it's not funny, but it's almost kind of a shared inside joke. And I think things like that, things that maybe are not necessarily 100% reflective of reality, but that everyone sort of agrees like, oh yeah, we'll discuss this. We've all sort of agreed on the parameters of this. I think that that can create a sense of community among anyone who sort of shares that, joke, for lack of a better word.
So in the same way, do you think little kids in Santa Fe think that Zozobra is real and their parents have to tell them, like Santa, eventually, that this is not a real creature?
That's such a good question. I don't know. I'll have to ask around. I can't answer that. But I do know that for sure the kids in the schools around here, the elementary school children, are like, they know what Zozobra is. They are learning about Zozobra as like a town thing. So I'm not sure if it's certainly possible, I think, that they are afraid of Zozobra. It's a scary looking thing. And the story is crazy. The story involves him kind of kidnapping children.
Right. Like all holidays do kind of have that sinister element to it. But that seems like that's what is fun about it in the end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so.
Well, maybe the story will spark people's interest in having your own Zozobra traditions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, or come to Santa Fe and check it out.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time, and we'll have to have you back again and again because it's always great to have you on the Sunday Long Read podcast.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed it.
This episode of the Sunday Long Read podcast was produced by Matthew Whitehurst and me, Amanda Ulrich. The co-founders of the Sunday Long Read newsletter are Jacob Feldman and Don Van Natta Jr. If you like this episode, you can support us by following the Sunday Long Read on all your favorite platforms, and make sure to check out our newsletter if you haven't already. You can subscribe at sundaylongread.com/subscribe. Until next time, thanks for listening.